shaping it. Today, you will hear from different global accelerators and their alumnus on the following topics: impact, policy, and community. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Marissa Vickers from Mass Challenge and Carl Copeland, the founder of Muse Motion, who will talk about the best measures of impact for clean tech startups. Marissa, take it away.
Hello, yes, I'm Marisa and I'm with Mass Challenge. I've been with them for almost 3 years and I'm the Texas Community Manager. If you don't know what Mass Challenge is, we are an international nonprofit startup accelerator and competition. We give away up to $1 million in equity-free funding. And we actually just announced who the top finalists will be for this year's award ceremony. I'll include later on some links that you can check out where it explains about the Mass Challenge Awards, the top finalists, and then also if you want to be part of the program as an expert, we're definitely in need of more mentors and judges and guest speakers, or if you're interested on how to join the program, I'll include that as well. Meanwhile, I would like to introduce Carl. He is a former alumni of ours for 2019, and he was also a top finalist, and he has 2 businesses. One is Muse Motion, and he is also creating a team of an electric air racing team that I'll let him talk more about. So, hey, Carl.
Hey, how are you doing, Marissa?
I'll give you a quick introduction on your businesses, and then we can go from there with the questions.
Yeah, so I'm Carl Copeland. I founded Muse Motion, and Muse Motion is a next generation electric motion company, basically a fancy word for motors. So we're designing the next generation of high performance ultralight electric motors. And as Marissa said, I was a 2019 top finalist with Mass Challenge Texas. And during that process, I unrelated to the event, but attending one of their events, I bumped into a gentleman who was launching a new all-electric air racing league, the first and currently only, for reasons. I mean, electric airplanes are very difficult. But I realized it was a perfect opportunity to showcase our technology in a very high demand environment. So tandem to that, I've launched an air racing team called Mobius Aero, and we are the only official team. We're a founding team of Air Race E, which is the electric league, and we're the only team in all of the Americas. And so we will be demonstrating our motor and motion and mobility platform in the most extreme spectator sport on the planet, which is Formula Air Racing. So that's a little bit about me.
Super cool. So tell me, in your opinion, what are the best measures of impact for a clean tech startup?
And I think that is a challenging question because as an entrepreneur who is founding a clean tech company, we are at the same time idealists and pragmatists. So we're constantly trying to balance our vision and our desire for impact with the pragmatics of what does it take to build a company, to monetize the company, to be successful. So I think you really have to think about what it is you want to accomplish and what are your priorities. And then you have to figure out what are the right market strategies to fund those initiatives. I know for me, I started with the desire to produce abundant, affordable, available, ubiquitous power. I wanted to turn the third world into the first world. I wanted to make cheap, environmentally sound power available to everyone. Now that sounds great, but the people I'm targeting don't have any money. So the question is how do we take the core technology and re-strategize that? And so I think that's really the big difficulty in clean tech startup is you're looking at your short-term goals and your long-term goals, and you've got to be very flexible. You've got to be able to pivot as the market presents itself to you and new opportunities arrive. And so the way I measure it, the way I measure it is how many lives have I changed and how much environmental issues have I solved, whether it's pollution or energy or energy waste or material waste. Well, how much of those things have I offset and how many lives have I improved? And that's not the normal metric investors are looking for when they're looking for a return on investment. So you've got the same time put those metrics in there and figure out how to monetize in the first world for your larger objectives.
Thank you for that answer. To kind of move on to that one, what do you think the future of clean tech looks like?
Yeah, it has a very strong future, but I think with all things, it's going to grow and evolve over time. And I think the core of clean tech is stewardship. We are needing to steward our resources, and we're needing to steward our technology, and we're needing to do it on behalf of, well, let me back up. Most companies are about, let's make profit. Let's make a product that people want, but let's make a profit. Whereas clean tech is, are we maximizing the resources and technology we have? And are we doing it responsibly? And are we doing it in a way where we can also make it sustainable from a profit standpoint? And so it's really, stewarding the resources. And also you need to steward what's left behind. A good example I like of that is take solar panels. I want to make it clear I'm not dissing solar panels, but most people don't understand with solar technology, the huge amount of pollutions and toxins and chemicals and mining that goes into, and energy that goes into making a solar panel. And that solar panel will never produce in its lifetime the amount of energy it took to mine, produce, and manufacture it. Now we're constant. That doesn't mean we don't invest in solar panels. Doesn't mean that there's not a technology just around the corner that would change that dynamic. But historically, they've not produced the energy it took to make them. And so we've got to think about not only what we're doing, what are the long-term consequences of the unintended costs that we didn't really think about. We also need to look at it, incentivizing adoption through open market principles. I don't think that government mandates are really the way to make a sustainable solution. People at some point, when the costs don't come down and it's not really working, they're going to abandon it, they're going to revolt. So we need to find a way to steward those in a way that's incentivizing the average consumer to want to adopt it, because they see the benefits, not just from the social environmental standpoint, but there's all the other economic and resource advantages there. And that comes down to making marketable products that you can, that are practical and pragmatic advantages. And then a big issue is also, like, if I were to go back to the solar panel, informing the public about the real total net costs of things, because there may be something that you're addressing. People say, well, I can get it so much cheaper over here. Like, well, you think you can. That's a short-term price, but it's being heavily subsidized. What if there's a longer-term, lower cost? And so I think informing our consumer base and the public is also a big part of what clean tech needs to look like. So it's the stewardship, the free market incentives, and educating the consumer base.
You bring up a lot of good points. So in your case, though, given everything, what kind of impact are you looking for your company to make on the world? Company, say.
Yeah. So the first thing we're targeting is reducing wasted or underutilized energy. To give an idea of what we're talking about, the power at your wall socket is 30 to 40. I mean, unless you're closer to the power plant, you've got about 30 to 40% efficiency at your wall plug. That means there's a 50, 60% loss between the power plant to your plug through distribution channels. And so one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate all that wasted energy, and produce the power on a distributed off-grid or distributed grid kind of a system. So reducing the wasted energy, reducing wasted resources. For instance, our motor technology uses 15% of the steel of a typical motor. That means that for the same, like if you're going to recycle a conventional motor, we can make 5 motors out of the steel that we recycled out of that motor. And so there's reducing, our goals are to reduce the waste, reduce the burden on limited or scarce resources, rare earth minerals, metals, copper, steel. We also want to reduce the pollutants and the chemicals used for processing those components. That's kind of the overburden that you don't normally see in manufacturing and production. Like, people don't realize the carbon footprint of a cell phone, just with all the technology and all the semiconductors and all the plastics and the manufacturing for the Gorilla Glass or whatever's on it. There's a lot of hidden environmental costs in there. So we're looking to reduce that for our sector, our market sector, back to then making electric power abundant and available. And then again, changing the third world dynamic and trying to bring those areas into second and then ultimately first world conditions. So those are the impacts we're targeting with our technology.
I guess this might kind of, to go a little bit more clear. So what kind of measure of impact do you want to have for your team and also your business based on all your personal initiatives?
Yeah, so being a clean tech focused company, we do different metrics than standard businesses. And we're, like I kind of said before, we're focused on lives improved. So how many lives are we changing through the technology? Whether it's bringing power to a third world area, whether it's powered prosthetics that give a person who lost a limb, high level of performance out of a new limb using our ultralight motors, whether it's changing the wasted energy dynamics or reducing pollution, reducing the expense of energy to make energy more available, as well as to increase its use around the world while not increasing the impact that energy consumption has on the world. And then also reducing, both at a macro and micro level, reducing the environmental impacts on the manufacturing, on the materials, recyclability, and waste over time. So we're measuring our impact in lives improved. There's the monetary side of it as we're going into first world markets. But the real thing is how much are we offsetting from both energy, materials, pollutants, and its long-term sustainability and recyclability.
That's really awesome. So just one last question. What do you have to look forward to in 2022?
So a couple of things. We're really excited about the race team, and I didn't really go too much into that, but we're actually taking our motor technology, which is we eliminated 85% of the steel, which means I can make the motor's structural components out of any non-magnetic material. And so, for instance, we're going to have our first flights, set some world records, and hopefully have our first air race next year, which will be the demonstration for our mobility platform. We're going to be doing it with the world's first and only 3D printed motor. So this motor, 80% of the motor will be out of 3D printed components, high strength, resilient polymers, and then our magnetics will make up the other 20% or so of the motor. But this motor has very high performance capabilities. So we'll have an ultralight strong motor in this airplane, and then use hopefully the momentum from those from the races and the world records to then package that and rebrand it as a mobility platform for other electric vehicles and other forms of mobility. So
that's really awesome. I can't wait to see that. Before we move on, are there any questions from the audience? I do see some people talking about China, but are there any other questions?
Don't hesitate to write your questions in the chat, and me and Marissa will definitely read them. And anybody on this panel can definitely chime in. Carl first, of course, but everybody else is welcome to answer if they have an opinion. All right. Let's see. We do have some questions. So Jeff, you said I've also been to oil well and flown over gas fields and seen the methane plume maps.
Yeah, I mean, the statement about solar panels is just factually wrong. I've been in solar 15 years. The amount of energy it takes is paid back by the solar panels within about a year. It used to be about 3 years. The efficiencies come down, have gone up. The amount of silicon in the crystal panels has gone down. The energy from making a solar panel is very much paid back. The energy from making a solar array is very much paid back in the early part of its lifetime. Unlike an oil well that just keeps on pumping oil out of the ground. But this whole conversation is not really about that. I think that the work Carl's doing on electric motors is fascinating.
Thank you so much for that comment.
And I just wanted to make a point to that. I was not putting down solar panels. I was going off of some metrics I was given at the last conference we were at. They were talking about the mine. They were including all the mining and all the resource and chemical processing and all of that stuff into that lump sum.
Including all of that.
Yeah.
Including all of that, as of course you do with oil and gas as well. Including all of that. It's about a 1 year energy payback.
Willie was making a comment that he visited 3 cities in China that were making solar panels, and they were the highest polluted cities that he has ever visited in his life. Interesting fact. All right, I think we're gonna close, the floor for questions. So thank you, Marissa and Carl. Now I'd like to introduce Kate Evinger from Generator and Jeff Jensen, founder of Clear. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. Who will talk about how community can be developed to support clean tech advancement. Kate, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eleanor. Really excited to be here today. So just to kind of give an overview, Generator is a turnkey platform for the creative economy that connects startup founders, investors, corporations, job seekers, universities, musicians, and artists. And when we do this is through our accelerator program. So here locally in Houston, we run our G-Beta Houston program, which is a free 7-week accelerator for early stage companies with local roots in Houston, Texas. Each program is capped at 5 teams and requires no fees and no equity. And really excited to have Jeff here today with us. Jeff Jensen, he is the co-founder and CEO of Clear. Clear is an alumni of our most recent G-Beta program from this summer. And he is doing some really amazing things in automating and creating a more sustainable pool care process. And so I'll kick it over to Jeff to give an overview of Clear and we can get started.
Sweet. Thanks, Kate. And good to see you again. And hello, everybody else, panel and the attendees. Clear is pretty simple. A lot of people don't know, actually, pools are fairly terrible for the environment in general. They off-gas CO2. That's the cause of the rise of pH in pools. Any heating you do or cooling you do requires energy. And of course, the chemicals that you put in a pool come in non-recyclable containers. And so what we've been trying to do is use IoT and technology and data to better the pool experience and actually make a really big impact on the environment by actually using carbon dioxide or CO2, injecting that into pool water, which actually can help balance the chemistry. And so a lot of people don't know that about swimming pools. It's, I think, going to play a surprisingly bigger role than most people think in the clean tech space. And super excited to be on the panel today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. So to kind of kick things off first with our discussion around community, how can a community be developed to support clean tech advancement?
So for me, clean tech, I think, has taken a different community building position ever since the news and the media outlets started publishing, basically single people that stand for, clean energy movements or demand change, et cetera. I think the clean tech community largely is a digital one, which I think, from that standpoint, it's arguable that, this platform, Cleantech Festival, what Village Insights is doing around trying to, connect and create a digital community. I think that's kind of for this wave and the change that clean tech companies or startups have, or the community that's around them, it will largely be a digital one as compared to, hey, we're going to open up a pure, clean tech working space, et cetera. For me, the impact has been, I think it's ever since, I forget her last name, but Greta Thunberg, and whether you like her or dislike her, I think it really set a precedent that the people rallying around change and what clean tech companies are doing. And obviously what Carl said around yeah, it's tough. Sometimes your company, for the stage you're at, it's more of a noble mission rather than a revenue mission, which is hard. And so the community that's needed and the community to be built, you have to have just solid either platforms or people in places that are connecting on a frequent basis to really build that, as my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I love, the digital focus that you mentioned, because you're able to connect communities across the globe together with this mission regarding clean tech. So I think that's really powerful. And it kind of leads me into my next question. What are some unique needs of clean tech startups that you've seen in your experience compared to those in other industries?
So I would say, and I think a lot of people right now and a lot of tech founders in Houston right now, especially, are talking about this, that historically, right, people in our city here in Houston have had no problem investing in oil and gas wells that pay dividends, process and procedure on finding new ways to use natural gas, etc. I think right now, the best thing that the Houston community could do, and you're starting to see it, is probably two things. Number one is seek out, new ventures or platforms, what Mass has done, Generator, VI, all these companies trying to create digital platforms to connect people. I think that as a community, we need to really, try and support all of them, but really promote and help seed the ones that I think are really bringing people together on a consistent basis. That's number one. Number two, I think if you're doing that successfully, arguably the thing that would change in Houston is that being like an energy city historically, it's a little bit baffling that we wouldn't see more investment, whether that's in physical space or digital infrastructure or just clean tech founders, that we're still not yet seeing like dollar and deal flow transition from like traditional energy to kind of this clean tech energy. So that's largely for me what I think at least our local community can do. I think broadly you're seeing some communities, especially that are struggling more with certain clean energy problems, whether that's water shortage or heavy CO2 pollution or pollution in general. I think when it becomes a personal problem for people, then people start to act. And so in some ways, more communities are reactive. Houston's a pretty great place to live. And we haven't been hit quite like that maybe yet. Maybe because of Harvey, but I think that's what we need to do to change.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a lot of really great points there. And it kind of leads into my next question, which is, how can communities best serve clean tech startups? And I know you touched on this a little bit with like access to physical space and investment into those companies. Would love to hear a little bit more.
Just about the community and investing and giving back to startups, or?
Yeah, to startups in the clean tech space.
Yeah, so I think there's two things, and I will go back to Carl's point. Number one is I think that Innovation Map's done a great job. Houston Exponential. I think the more we promote companies on LinkedIn, digital media, building that community, the more that we're promoting like real winners that have great technology, maybe still early stage, but are really on to something. I certainly think that is a strong force that will help people realize that, wow, like we really have smart people working in our community trying to change the world. And, not that other companies are bad or other verticals are bad, but in particular, I think this is a really exciting one. And so certainly I think digital promotion can be one. Number two is, I think as well, we're surrounded by great universities. I'd like to see, including myself, finding a better way. And I know there's a new company as well out there that started like an intern platform, but I think if we can closely more integrate our education facilities, U of H, Rice, and there's a lot going on. And I know a lot of people on the call and the attendees know a lot going on, but I think we can help the job and labor shortage and skill shortage by closer integrating really the like access to university and talent that we have into startups and clean tech startups.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff. My last question for you is, what has your experience been as a founder working in the clean tech space?
I think a challenging one, certainly. Number one, like, as I mentioned, a lot of people don't think of pools as being in clean tech. So there's education that certainly I have to do. I do think there's a component that will need to probably change investors' mind. And that is for all the green tech players, that I know, one's on this call and not like, I know there's Nanotech who is at Innovation Map and, a couple other companies really working on, big carbon energy initiative changing type of products. I think a trend you're going to see is that a lot more of these are hardware based, including like what Carl has going on. And I think traditionally for bigger investors and just me personally, the model that you put in front of investors, the business model, the way that you sell your product and kind of your mission, it's not been as attractive of me going and pitching a software as a service company. But I think it's inevitable that you see a bunch of clean tech companies that are going to need hardware, and certainly hardware has to change what happens with carbon or water, et cetera. And so ultimately, for me at least, I'm hoping that in the coming years that investment thesis can more stronger support hardware-based technologies, where traditionally it's been more SaaS-based, is my opinion. And at least for me, I'm super excited about what we're doing. I think it's really cool. We found a great niche in saying that we can, use carbon dioxide to balance water and create a completely circular, renewable ecosystem for people to have safe water while swimming. I think that's a very great mission to have.
Definitely. It sounds like Mike in the chat's interested in getting a pool filter. So we have some excited people in the chat.
Nice.
Awesome.
Mike is asking, how can we get your technology on our pools? Sounds awesome.
Yeah, I probably actually need to get Mike a replacement for one on his pool, but I'm here in Houston, and yeah, certainly if you have a pool and you want the carbon dioxide injection system, can reach out to me at jeff@ketoai.com or go to our website, clearpool.com. And it is innovative. You won't find a pool service, or if you own a pool, you won't find a pool company to do it for you. So we're kind of a sole source, at least right now. So.
All right. Carl was saying that you do echo Jeff's statement when it comes to finding funding for clean tech in Texas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a joke that I say when I'm talking to prospective investors, and it seems like in Texas, if it's not oil and gas, real estate, or a cell phone app, you're out of luck. It's really hard to get. I mean, it's the market's so fertile on those other avenues that it's really hard. They want a 6-month turnaround on an investment, and when you're looking at developing a technology that has a pathway of a couple of years, and especially if you have any kind of regulatory hurdles between you and the end goal, it seems like, well, I actually saw a metric while I was part of Mass Challenge that showed that 80 to 85% of Texas companies had to go outside of Texas to get funding, and 80 to 85% of the funding done in Texas was done to companies outside the state of Texas. I think we need to reverse that big time, and I think we need to find local Texas investment families and funds and investors to invest into the intellectual property that Texas has developed over the last several decades. I mean, we're rich. If all of these incubators show anything, is how rich we are with knowledge and information and technology, and it's just getting the funding to get to market it can be a challenge.
So I have a question for you, because that's very interesting. I think, when I moved to Houston, Texas about, 8 years ago, I think what you're saying was totally true. But I think in the last 2 years or 3 years, you've seen actually a shift in the model where you've actually seen, Mass Challenge come into town, Generator, Greentown Lab, all of the other accelerators that actually have in their tow a bunch of different VCs who are, trying to look at Texas and trying to fund, Texas companies. So do you feel that there's been a little shift in the last maybe 1 or 2 years regarding, a lot of different programs, companies, and also tied to this, I've seen that Houston wants to become, the energy city or in the US. So they're not it was predominantly oil and gas for sure, but in the last couple of years, we've seen a shift where renewable wants to be integrated, and there's a lot of different companies who are, putting their HQ in the city, focusing on renewable.
Yeah, I know for me, I've had a very difficult time. They want you in the market at a certain market cap and a certain revenue stream before they're even interested. And so a small company like mine, unless you make a connection, that's where Mass Challenge really helped me, was it put me into communities where I could find someone interested enough in what I was doing that they looked at me more as a program than a traditional investment. And so I think that the challenge has been for me, from my experience, to get someone willing to come in and work with, to invest in you and be patient over a couple of years to help you get to market has been hard, when for a lot of people, they're all looking for unicorns. And if they don't see an instant unicorn, they just pass and go on the next. And there's just so many people at their doorstep with ideas too. You're competing against that. And when you've got full for-profit over here, and then you've got a clean tech startup, which, like I said before, is both idealist and pragmatist, right? So that's just been my challenge. Now, have I had more interest? Have I had more inquiries? Yes, I just haven't got through to, I haven't got over the hump of them wanting me to not need them anymore before they're ready to invest in me. So that's kind of the joke I put up there, is like, when I get to where they want me to be, I wouldn't need them. So.
All right, I think Willie is also commenting that big investors are not interested in small startups, and that he hears that a lot of big investors are complaining that there are no big energy transition opportunities to invest in. Another comment of his is that angels and VCs are the only ones interested, and they are very picky, which is with a 1 to 2% success rate. I'm guessing that's all how you feel based back to your comment, Jeff and Carl as well. All right, well, thank you so much, Kate and Carl. Now I'd like to introduce Juliana from Greentown Labs. So Juliana, in order for you to speak, I need to introduce you as a panelist. So I'm going to promote you. If you can come on and join the chat. And so Juliana, who is the head of the Greentown Labs, will have a discussion with Patrick from Refterra and Jeff, who's the founder of Veloci Energy. And they will talk about how does the regulatory environment affect clean tech startups. And if Juliana doesn't join, then I'll just, I know you're here, I see you. I'll just start the questions. How about that? So for you, Jeff, and for you, Patrick, how does the regulatory environment affect clean tech startups? And so how do you feel like, the first question really is about how much does US regulations or policies affect your startup? Why don't you go first, Jeff?
Well, Patrick and I are both in the electrical space, and electricity is the most regulated, most fragmented industry in the world. In the US alone, we have 54 different regulatory bodies, 54 state and city regulatory bodies, and FERC, and of course Congress. And then we have 3,300 utilities. And so fragmentation is horrible. There is no US market for electricity. And so you can't create a business plan for the marketplace. You need to create multiple or flexible business plans that work across vastly differing regulatory environments in order to make it work. And we live in a regulated world. We might be a deregulated company, but most of what we're doing is either skirting alongside of or with regulated entities.
Yeah, completely agreed with everything Jeff has said there. Obviously, the regulatory environment surrounding power and energy businesses in particular are pretty heavy on the regulation side. We have things like accelerated tax regimes federally that can assist in building out large-scale kind of infrastructure projects. Things like FERC regulating what the ISOs and the RTOs spread across the country can do. And then you've got the one-offs like ERCOT kind of making their own decisions on the state side. And that really determines what we're able to build out. So echoing what he said, essentially just having to build really flexible business models to get around all of those different regulatory regimes is absolutely vital in the clean tech space, specifically on the power side, much more than other areas.
And it was said to me 15 years ago by a state senator that utilities are regulated to the extent that they desire to be regulated. Utilities have more lawyers and pay them more money than any public regulatory body across the country does. And so the regulatory environment is very much driven by what the utilities want. And then let's move forward. We complain about utilities being slow and not transitioning fast enough and such, but we have spent 100 years regulating utilities to be, frankly, slow and conservative. That's what we've wanted them to be. And they have become and started to do that very, very well. And now we say, well, change fast. But the regulators haven't changed yet. The regulators aren't pushing. And it has been said more than once that each utility actually only has one customer, their regulator. And so they need to keep their regulator happy. The rest of us, not so much.
So we have Juliana who's on the panel. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sure you had some maybe computer problems or issue.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to make it to Greentown. I was driving and it didn't promote me as a panelist, and then I had to basically log on and log in again. Sorry about that, but I know that Jeff is doing a great job.
Yes, this is Juliana, who's the head of Greentown Labs in Houston. So thanks so much for joining. Do you want to ask a second question, Juliana, or?
Go for it. I think you already have them. I'm gonna go for them. I don't even know which one you asked already. So
I figured, so I'm just going to continue my job. Awesome. All right, so my next question for you, Patrick and Jeff, is there a US regulation that positively affects your startup?
Sure, I'll go ahead and kick this off. Kind of tying into what Jeff was saying, all these utilities have been very, very slow to update what they're doing. And FERC over the last few years has been doing a marginal job on updating the standards in certain ISOs and RTOs to kind of encourage adoption of energy storage technologies. I think one thing in particular that's been very helpful in the energy storage space is a couple of different orders that came through that have basically encouraged those organizations to basically include distributed and behind the meter energy storage applications in their planning cycles, and then also allowing those owners of those facilities to participate in wholesale electricity markets. So those types of changes on the FERC side have definitely sped up adoption of energy storage technology, and I think that's incredibly helpful to us. I give a second part of that answer for our startup in particular, and I guess clean tech more broadly, in that there are several programs, including SBIR grants, STTR grants, that the federal government basically uses to help initialize new technologies and help small companies such as our own bring those technologies to market. And for us specifically, that's been absolutely vital. So we received an NSF grant phase 1 over the last year, and that's allowed us to build out a prototype unit of our newest energy storage technology. And I think programs like that are absolutely vital in encouraging kind of a healthy ecosystem of technologies across the clean tech space and otherwise.
Yeah, I agree with Patrick there on the FERC order, particularly 2222, to get really technical. However, as an example of the regulatory horrors, also, FERC issues an order and then gives the utilities 18 months to figure out what they're going to do to comply with that order. They all pretty much are going to miss the deadline. And then at some point, and then they'll submit their orders, which will be, to a large part, probably not what we want. And then there will be a fighting process to make them better. And then, 3-4 years after the FERC order, some actual progress will be coming out of that. So it's a very late, the regulatory change process is not meeting the speed that we need to confront the crises we have. Which is why we take a two-pronged approach of both trying to fit within the existing regulatory process, trying to negate the need to trying to go around it, and then also trying to fit in it. One other regulatory area, semi-regulatory legislative incentive area, is energy storage, which Patrick and I are both doing. Only receives tax credits if we're coupled with renewable energy directly. I think we both believe strongly that we need standalone energy storage along with everything else. And the reconciliation budget bill, if there is one, call your senator today, especially if your senator is Joe Manchin, or that standalone tax credit will be transformative for our businesses, specifically if it is coupled with, as it is in the language I've seen, what they call direct pay, where we don't need to go get the tax credit from one of the 15 large entities in the US who has the tax credit liability and takes a 15% whack on it for their services, and would instead create a check that gets paid to us for the tax liability. Because the federal government, when they give you $1 tax credit, it costs them exactly the same amount from an accounting principle if they give you $1 bill instead. And so we're hoping that gets through, and that regulatory framework would be really transformative for the industry.
Thank you so much. You know what, before I ask my third question, I'm gonna definitely relay one question from Carl. So Patrick, Jeff, how have you approached the SBIR pathway? Have you had a SBIR expert help you file and navigate?
We've not approached the SBIR pathway, not that we shouldn't have, but we have not. So I'll let Patrick take that all.
Yeah, so I'm certainly not the expert in this area. The CEO of my company is actually a physics PhD grad from the University of Houston Schools Network. And while doing that, he learned the whole process of grant writing in much more detail than I've ever been exposed to. So he's kind of my in-house SBIR expert on that front. But there are certainly people that focus on that area externally to organizations. And obviously, if they cost you too much, that can be problematic, but there are certainly resources out there to help businesses approaching those areas. We certainly expect to continue pursuing grants wherever possible as we move forward as a business, and it's definitely a big boon to other types of clean tech organizations as well.
All right, thank you. All right, last question is, what is the most significant regulation you'd like to see changed? All right, Jeff, you're on.
Boy, that's hard to say what's the most significant because it's such a fragmented regulatory environment. But really, I think the most important one is that right now utilities are incentivized when they're putting in, say, EV charging. When they have to upgrade the grid, they're incentivized to upgrade the grid as a bigger version of what it is today. And if we simply try and replicate the existing grid as a larger grid, A, we run out of money, B, we run out of engineers to do it, C, we run out of time, and D, we end up with a bigger copy of the existing grid, which is failing us all over the place. So that's not obviously, I don't think that's a very good way to proceed. And so changing those regulations to allow them to upgrade the grid, but require them to do a cost benefit study of alternative means of providing that upgraded service, which would include storage, and potentially other technologies to provide the best cost benefit that goes towards actually making the grid we need rather than the grid we have. A famous quote by Hawaiian Electric Company that says it all, where the grid we have is not the grid we need. So let's stop, end of quote. So let's stop rebuilding it bigger because we need a different grid.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree with you more, Jeff. Whatever we can do to kind of help the market recognize the value in different forms of infrastructure like energy storage, as opposed to what we've just been doing historically, would be hugely beneficial to kind of the grid resiliency as a whole, and then also the companies like ours that are acting in the market. I think I'd also throw it back to what you were talking about with the standalone storage, ITC, and direct pay. Those things would be absolutely huge for basically building out storage as a resource, especially for smaller companies like our own that are trying to get new technologies off the ground. I think that would be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, we actually, the first time that direct pay was put in was for the solar industry back in 2009, 2010. I was on the board of the Solar Energy Industry Association at that point in time, helped drive that through. And that direct pay program for solar it's what made the inflection point happen after 2009, where solar kind of inflected up. That one incentive change from tax credit to tax credit with payment transformed the industry, and it could do the same for us.
I'd also add in one more thing that pertains a bit more closely to ERCOT, our home market for many of us in Houston here. There are a lot of regulations within ERCOT that basically state that the local transmission authorities aren't allowed to own energy storage assets, and various other parties can't own or operate types of assets. And that's really prohibitive towards building out a better system, kind of as Jeff was hinting at a moment before. So anything that we can do to change those systems that were set up for something 50 years ago, and we can modernize those away to really open the market up and make it a more resilient, functional grid, then I think that would be awesome as well.
Yeah, I mean, literally, if we were to convince CenterPoint that putting batteries at the end of every distribution line was brilliant and better for the system, they wouldn't do it because they can't own it. They can't make money on it. And companies are motivated to do what they can make money on. And so we really need to change that to let them own more and more storage so that if it makes sense, they can do the right thing. That goes back to that old regulatory paradigm again.
So Carl is asking and saying that I assume you're targeting distributed and microgrid applications. What markets do you think are the most favorable of this change?
So for the first 18 months of our company, I banned the word microgrid in the company because microgrids are hard to do, expensive, hard to economically justify, hard to build, hard to maintain, et cetera, et cetera. So we now do use the word occasionally, but what we say instead is that we're out to rejuvenate the edge of the grid, make the grid flexible, able to do what it used to do for us, make it usable for the future. So rejuvenate the edge of the grid. That might include putting microgrids in some areas. That might include putting energy storage as a microgrid, but just makes the grid stronger in an area. So the applications are make the grid stronger at the edge. The details of that might be microgrids and other methods.
As far as Repterra's operations go, our initial target markets span mostly the large scale, grid scale, utility scale kind of projects, solar plus storage as a first customer base, and then beyond that, things like EV charging. And then we've yet to explore deeply the microgrids, kind of smaller applications. I think there are a lot of applications for microgrid and in terms of like the regulatory barriers and things like that in international or like small island communities where there aren't a whole lot of other options and fewer regulatory barriers to jump over. So that's kind of what we're exploring in our initial stages, but certainly something we'll be looking at in the future as well.
Thank you. I mean, I have a question or maybe a comment, and maybe Juliana can, because you're the clean tech expert, I'm not. But coming from Europe, because France or Spain or any European country is not a federal country, all of their clean tech policies or grid it's a one strategy, one vision. So I think it is easier for clean tech startups to actually work outside of the United States because there's not those, state barriers where it seems here in the US that Texas, California, Hawaii have all this different rules, regulation, different grids. You cannot own assets. It seems very nebulous as opposed to Europe, as everybody has like one strategy for their country, right? Do you want to comment on it, Julia?
Well, definitely the fact that Texas has its own grid was very beneficial during a very long time. And now it's proven complicated because when we're having problems and not the right winterization of the grid, we cannot get help from anybody. So that independence that made a lot of money to many people is now creating a lot of problems. So I think we need to rethink the grid, as Jeff mentioned, and I think that the problem is that incentives are not aligned. There's a very big difference from what the companies can make money on and what is right to be done, and regulations need to make sure that every stakeholder gets aligned.
Yeah, and the regulatory environment in Europe is not totally unified across the continent. It's unified in the countries, but it is much more unified even across countries, across country barriers than it is in the US. Much more unified. I used to have a lot of companies come over from Europe getting into the solar industry and they said, Jeff, we want to get into the US solar market, and I would just stop them right there and say, which market? There's 280 markets in the US because there's 54 regulatory bodies, residential, small commercial, small utility, large utility. And of those, only X were active at any point in time. So it is a phenomenally complex environment.
So question for you both, because it is 280 markets, like you said, is there like a need or an interest for each of your companies to pursue, what you're doing internationally, whether it's like, reaching underserved communities on islands or Africa, or do you have that international mindset?
We've developed our products to be, we're UL listed now, and we've developed the product to get the CE listing fairly easily. And we'll absolutely go after the foreign markets. We just need the capital and the partner to do it with, but we're already in conversations.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. We've designing our products such that it can be applied in any of these various markets, and we actually expect a pretty decent chunk of our initial customer base to be international, either in Europe or island markets, kind of like I hinted at before. So definitely we're exploring international opportunities. We'd love to apply our technology everywhere, as we think it could be hugely beneficial across all those areas.
And
To add to that, quite a few of our partners are European, so they're also, potentially exploring pilots there and elsewhere. So,
do you feel that international strategy is actually a positive point for VCs, or more of a hurdle for them? They get more scared that you're trying to expand internationally, or they're looking for it?
I mean, as was pointed out earlier, with VCs always want what you don't have. So if you have focus on international markets, they want you to have focus on like one market. If you have focus on revenues, they want you to focus on product. Only being a little cynical here. So it also varies with the VC. They're all different. And some of them will tell you what they're looking for and some won't. So, the best recommendation I would always give is like, create a business plan, follow it. Don't try and do what the VCs want you to do. Follow your business plan, because there's some VC who wants that business plan. You just got to follow it and do it and execute it with precision.
I couldn't agree more. I think that sometimes VCs should just be straight and say, like, you don't fit our thesis, because they have a typical company they invest in. And maybe it's also up to the entrepreneurs to learn what the typical company they invest in are. We need to do our due diligence too. We need to figure out what the companies they're looking for, so that we don't waste our times either. But it's true that sometimes VCs, instead of telling you, you don't fit with our thesis because that's what we invest in, they would try to just look for loopholes in your business plan or your business model. And if you follow blindly what they say, you might end up nowhere, So the same way VCs stick to their thesis, I think entrepreneurs should stick to what they think is right, their business model, they go to market, and try to make a good fit with the right investor.
I have a question, and it's going to be a last question, because what you're working on is very cash intensive, as opposed to startups that are working, on SaaS or not physical products. Like, how did you came up with the funding to actually, start working? Going to the labs and, having, a product. Like, what was, your pathway towards funding to start your company?
I've had, we've raised over $2 million so far, and it's been through hundreds of phone calls. My job, my full-time job is fundraising, and then I have multiple part-time jobs to do the rest of my work. Hardware is hard. It's less attractive to VCs because it doesn't get the multiples they believe it does, but they don't believe it. Mark Horowitz has a famous quote, "Software will eat the world." My famous quote is, "It needs something to eat." And we're out trying to build something that will, allow software to operate a thing, because it needs to operate something. So you just got to make the phone calls and keep on plugging and believe in it, and continually test your message, test your product, and reconfigure your message as needed in order to make sure that you're communicating the value that's being created by the hardware to the VCs. And that's often a very hard thing to do. What is the actual value that you're creating? Because it's much more than that little or big widget you're creating. There's much more value in that, and communicating that overall value to the VC is what's really important.
Okay.
Definitely a numbers game. You need to kiss a lot of frogs before you get to the right VC, and you have to have very thick skin, and for anything that is clean tech, energy transition related, you also need to do a lot of education. You need to educate your VCs. Sometimes they don't even know about the innovation you're creating, because some things have not been ever tried. And I think that's the educational part.
Well, and as soon as you show them that it's possible, then they want to know, why can't somebody else just duplicate it?
Patrick?
So our path has been fairly similar to what Jeff described. We were able to raise some early angel funding in the Houston area. We're fairly lucky that around here there's a lot of really technical knowledge base from the oil and gas world. And that's essentially where our angel investors came from. And then beyond that, we were also able to raise funding through the SBIR grants that I talked about earlier. So with those things, we've essentially been able to fund the development of our prototype. And then to quickly answer the other question that's in the chat here, we're using kinetic energy storage, which is a fairly different approach than a lot of others are using in the market right now. So if you're interested in seeing a bit more about that, we have a video posted on the platform Constellation that you can go and view, where we go into a bit more detail.
Thank you. All right, I would like, before we finish this webinar, I would like to introduce Brandy, who is representing Impact Hub. So today, there's no startups for Impact Hub, but I would love Brandy to kind of, speak in 2 minutes what Impact Hub does and how can Impact Hub help the clean tech startups in Houston and globally as well.
Sure, thank you. It's great to be here, and congrats for all the progress that's been made with the startups. It remains near and dear to my heart because I grew up in the oil and gas and energy sector. Just to let you know a little bit about Impact Hub, we have some local roots here in Houston, but it is a global organization. We are focused on helping to empower diverse talent and connect people that are focused on basically helping social entrepreneurs solve and tackle the issues of the Sustainable Development Goals. So basically everything that has been discussed today, from reducing the carbon footprint to, cleaner water and, reducing emissions, all aligns with that. And we don't limit ourselves to those if you're actually just an entrepreneur. We're looking for people who are change agents, innovators, and really just want to see the right thing be done. And I could say for myself, why I really wanted to support here today is because, really echoing what has been said across the board today, is that I would like to see more of an effort to where people aren't being responsive to things because either it's driven by government mandates, incentives. People should be doing the right thing. And so I'm happy to see and hear about the respective missions and the whys of the startups. And, like I said, it's near and dear to my heart, and I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much, everyone. We have 1 minute for questions. If you'd like to write it in the chat, I'll be happy to read them. But if there's no questions, I want to thank everybody for attending our panel today. We're so happy that you were here to hear from the founders in the space. We would like to recommend, after the end of this panel, to continuing the conversations by connecting with these folks on Constellation, as well as going into the Cleantech Festival group and the subgroups attached to it that are named after the accelerators. In this group, you will find the company's demo videos, so don't hesitate to post content, interact in the feed, make collisions, send connection requests. Do we have any questions? I don't think we do. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. And I will see you hopefully all into the subgroups in Constellation. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Take care.